Everyone, welcome back to the Quiz Marketing Podcast. My name is Josh Hainum. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Interact Quizmaker. Today I'm joined by Naomi Crellin. Oh, I knew I was going to mess up that name. Naomi Crellin, she's CEO of Storycraft Lab. And we're going to talk about quizzes. We might specifically talk about asking really good questions on quizzes. That might be our focus. We'll see. But thanks for being here, Naomi. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Josh, I appreciate the opportunity to come chat to you about this. It's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I think it's so fun and there's so many levels to it. So I'm excited to chat with you about it because if you want to start off by telling the people what quizzes you've worked on, especially some of the more recent ones we were chatting about over email and whatnot, I think that'd be a great starting point.
Oh gosh, yes. Well, hello, people. I am happy to talk to you about the quizzes that we use at Storycraft Lab. We're a small experiential agency with a focus in audience understanding. So that's really kind of where we come in to the process. We kind of look at audience from the outset in order to inform strategy and design choices relative to engagement and experiences. I set Storycraft Lab up because I had this kind of deeply held, slightly revolutionary belief that there is room for empathy in all of the business events that we create. And this notion was one that I held way pre-pandemic, which was much more revolutionary at that point as a notion than post-pandemic, where I think we've all kind of learned to understand empathy through a new lens. So what I had looked at was for my clients and for my team, what are the different ways that we can introduce empathy and those empathetic insights at scale into the processes and projects that we work on? Because there are a lot of reasons to always do what we've done and sometimes to ask people to do something new in terms of making space for that empathetic process. We have to have a solution that we can run with. Well, quizzes were one of the first things that we turned to as a way to think about true dialogue with an audience at scale, right? It was important to us that, a dialogue involves asking a question, getting curious, thinking about the taker of the quiz as a whole human and what are the things that they're contending with, what are their aspirations and preferences and emotions and needs that they want to express to somebody in that act of dialogue. And then on the other side, dialogue means listening, hearing, considering what has been shared with you, responding in a way that shows the value of that survey. And, I think that's another thing to put out there is traditional survey methods, especially when we're thinking about experience marketing, experience design. For whatever reason, they seem to have been issued post-event. They're not geared to being dialogue or a conversation or a kind of joyfully curious moment at all. It's more of a kind of checking of boxes and statement of numbers. And as a result, they're less and less useful. So that's really kind of where we got connected. Josh was kind of our first tool in rolling out these quizzes was Interact. And we tried it on a few smaller internal projects, but then the really big one that took off was for NASA's Artemis mission. We helped them design an exhibit that started off at Comic-Con, and they wanted to connect with humans in that human level and have them feel a sense of affinity and belonging, really, with NASA as an organization. And the quiz was one of the ways that we opened up that dialogue.
Yeah, I really appreciate all the different words that you used in that description. Like
It's a lot.
joyfully curious.
Mm-hmm.
Experience is kind of more well known now, but
Yeah.
those types of words that you use to describe the connection and the empathy that you can build between a brand and an audience it's so important from our perspective because that's the real thing that makes the difference. Everybody gets fixated on the results of like, oh, well, how many people took it and views and leads if you're doing that and sales if you're doing that. And it's like, yeah, but like that's all a byproduct of these other things.
Right. Yeah, there is, and oftentimes we look at the quiz as a tool to get us to this quantitative data that proves out an ROI or an engagement factor. But really, I think we need to flip it to the audience lens and imagine the quiz as a rare opportunity to have a conversation with somebody. Right? You do that work of asking and getting curious with them, and finding those ways that allow them to respond as humans as well. I think a lot of the time we go down the path of scoring systems from 0 to 5 or 10, the whole kind of Likert scale thing, and I think we should try not to do that, actually. I think I would say if we look at the quiz as a channel for communication and dialogue, then lean into the power of words, right? There is, the audience, there's a lot that we can do at the end with the product of that input to translate the qualitative to the quantitative and do the work on the numbers that we need to do. That's all there. But really, your audience, if we're asking them to respond to these joyfully curious questions, to get joyfully curious with us, to share their needs and preferences and emotions and feelings and aspirations through a quiz, we need to allow them to do that in the most natural and authentic system they have. And as humans, that is words, that's not numbers. Like, how do you feel today? Well, I feel like 3.5. You just say, like, that's not really how the conversations tend to go.
No, no, no.
And what do you do with that?
Weird,
And is
weird
my
conversation.
3.5 the same as your 3.5? I
Yeah,
don't know. Like,
like
there's a
what
whole,
is this scale?
yeah, analysis that we have to do.
Yes, that. But in my head, right, the reason why you would default to something like that is that it it's for lack of a term easier. Like
Right. Oh, absolutely.
it's it's easier to just say like rank yourself. It's harder to know how to describe those different levels. Like if we just take that specific question, how
Yeah.
do you feel today? Describing in words is like dangerous because if you do it wrong, everyone's like, what are you talking about? Like none of this resonates with me.
Right.
So I think that's my next question for you is like, how do you get to that level where I mean, like if we take that specific quiz that was at Comic Con, like if somebody comes up and like the questions don't resonate at all,
Yeah.
it's a really bad experience, right?
Right.
Like they're just
Yeah.
gonna walk away like this is like why would I do this?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you build the knowledge of the audience like you opened this conversation with? How do you build that to where you can feel confident asking questions?
Asking questions. So there are a couple of different ways that we tend to go at it. Um, Number one is lots of user testing. And actually, if you most products, most organizations, most communities these days, they do have a community group. They have a user group of people that are fans and are passionate and are invested. Sometimes your user group can honestly it could be a group of internal employees and their nearest and dearest, but I think there are ways that you can quite quickly mock up a prototype and do some of that testing and just kind of see what's resonating and where people have questions, where the words that you're maybe using in those questions are universally understood, comprehended, that there is a consistency in that interpretation of the question. So there is that. In terms of user testing, let people get hands-on, because what ends up happening by the time they've helped to contribute to the creation of that quiz as an expression of your brand or your organization, they've got skin in the game, they've got agency and ownership, they are advocates for this quiz, they believe, it's actually a wonderful way of building engagement through the process of designing an engagement tool, which is quite meta, but there's actually a lot of value that we've seen there, especially kind of in developer audiences and for tech groups. So, user testing. The other thing that we do at Storycraft Lab is that we do have some sets of IP that we lean on, that we have developed over years with our different quizzes, where we assign certain words or responses to preference types. So, kind of having that rationale that has been kind of proven and tested and iterated across a number of different sources is helpful, because it kind of gives us a baseline to go back to or to pull from, when we come in at at speed, and help people develop a quiz that has a good robust logic system behind it. The other thing that we do as an activity is like customer experience. So sometimes we'll actually go to live events and experiences, and we'll do kind of in the interstitial, like in between spaces. We're not like a session or a booth or anything, but we might be in a hallway or in a lounge area. And we have a series of activations that we run. All different ways of doing this, but it allows people to pick words that are representative to them of a certain thing. One of them is, we call it the Wheel of Belonging, where people are selecting words that have meaning to their own interpretation and experience of belonging. So we get to see within a group who's using certain terms with frequency and consistency enough that that larger organization should pay attention to that area, right? Another activation we've done is around emotional data, where we have quite literally had a big old wall with these kind of Velcro or push pin words, and we ask people to place them on a numeric scale. And this is where I often see people like get into the analysis paralysis when we introduce numbers into the equation. But it's quite interesting. So we give them emojis and we give them words, and we say, okay, if you were to rank this word, with 10 being the best, like most positive, and 1 being the least positive, where would you place these words on a scale? And then we like allow the debate, because people have different feelings about it. And so we kind of cycle through this activity, and people might take happy, and some people will put happy at a 10. Some people only put it at a 7, but there's this there's a difference in where it gets scored and its kind of positivity rating. And the same with emojis. And we kind of go through that activity, and we're able to look back and say, which words and symbols are this group interpreting with consistency? So we did that once for a group of marketers, actually, and like the fire emoji, right? Which some people may say is like hot, right? Oh, you're so hot, that's amazing, like you're on fire, that's great. It was either getting scored at like 9 or 10, or for some people it was getting scored at like 1 or 2. This thing is on fire. It's a dumpster fire, like there's a big problem here, this is an emergency. So there was a real inconsistency in the way that particular emoji was being used, which means that we can't necessarily use it as a way of getting people's reactions. But there were some emojis and there were some words that were consistent in the way that all people were scoring them, so that we knew that as we engaged in dialogue at scale with this audience, these were the words that we could use in our questions and be confident in the way that they were being responded to.
Mm,
Yeah.
I like all of those. I think the words again are jumping out at me because it's so important. And I've seen that throughout the 12 years of running this company. Is like a
Mm.
question with the right word versus the wrong word. It can mean something totally different,
Yeah.
or it can be the difference between this feels really generic and this feels like really specific to me.
Yeah.
And the way that you're describing that, especially the wall, makes a lot of sense because it's like maybe they use one word to mean one thing. And if you chose a different word and everybody wanted to use this word, then it would totally miss the mark, even though it's like the same thing. Like if you were to ask,
Right.
a random set of people, what do these words mean? They'd be like, it's the same. But for
Mhm.
this audience, they mean totally different things.
Totally different thing. And that's where I think, yeah, your point is a really great point, is being specific about who your audience are, because we're none of us are a monolith, but it's identifying those things that do connect us as audience groups or segments, right? And I think breaking out of the kind of survey as a yawn fest to being something that is thought provoking, that does actually ask people to consider the words that they are using. Um, that's actually a gift. And what's really nice sometimes when I do those kind of lab activities, and this is the lab in Storycraft Lab, is that we do a lot of, we have the IP, but we kind of take it into spaces where we test it. It's really nice to see teams come together and do those activities. Because oftentimes, if you think about collaboration and teaming, um, it's about understanding one another, right? And sometimes at the core of that can be the words that we choose to be representative of our emotions, our state of mind, and how we understand one another. So it's kind of an activity that is, it's a win-win. It's one of those things that benefits the organization in terms of understanding their audience as a block, and those things that are kind of coming to the top despite all of the kind of diversity of opinions and interests, right? There are those things that we as marketers can identify to lean into in our communications. But it also, those activities provide a gift to the quiz taker as a human, in terms of that self-awareness, in terms of that development of interest, and perhaps, yes, a moment of joyful curiosity can be a gift to somebody's day. And I think that's we saw that at the NASA experience as well. That was people were just so excited
Mm.
to take that quiz, and to, just as a bit of background, the quiz was set up so that people could identify the role that they would play on Team Artemis. And we had developed the logic system and the words that we were using with a number of subject matter experts and different folks on the NASA side. And as we were doing all of our research to come up with kind of what questions we would ask and what the responses would mean, we heard it was the ground systems control group. They referred to themselves as being, we are the boots on the ground that put the boots on the moon. And it was this being able to identify their kind of function, even though they didn't get to do the astronauty space stuff, they still had a pivotal role as a member of that team in putting people on the moon and beyond when it comes to the Artemis mission. And that was what gave us the theme for that quiz. It was find out what boots will you wear on Team Artemis, and you could be the moon boots or the space boots or the ground boots or all the different types of boots that they wear. And then at Comic-Con, there was this ability to kind of step into the boots on site within the booth environment. So you did this photo op, and you could get your boots pins, the NASA pins, wildly popular. Meet astronauts that were also either playing cards with the boots that you would wear. So we kind of took the quiz as this vehicle for that experience. But then also kind of post-event, we had a whole kind of content plan. As you can imagine, NASA has a universe, pun intended, of content and ways that people can learn about NASA and its missions. So depending on the boots result that you got from the quiz, we provided some recommendations for, like, okay, you're going to want to go and learn about ground control systems, or you might want to learn about food science in space. or spacesuit design, or all of the, there are all of these different ways in which people could see themselves and relate to the Artemis mission.
That's awesome.
It was,
I'm just like digesting all the different things that went according to plan based on our stuff that we've seen over the years, where I'm just
I
like,
know.
that's the right thing, that's the right thing, that's the right thing. Cool, cool, cool. All of those would be interesting to like have a deeper conversation about. I think that the experience, just to click on that a little bit, like the experience being a reflection of your research,
Mm.
like literally the thought in my head when you're talking about the ground control and using the words that they use versus, if you go on to the internet and you search for like a space quiz, the it's like 90% the same and 100% different, if that makes sense. Like, it's really similar to something that you'd find on, some random entertainment website of like, oh, space
Mhm.
personality, whatever. But it's also completely not the same because like they don't know that to use those words. They don't know that like that's what the actual team refers to themselves as.
Yeah.
And so
Mm.
I think that I just want to highlight that because it's like that is the experience. I guess the experience is like it's the quintessential idea of experience. Experience is like I get to be a part of something, and you can't be a part of something if you don't know what that thing is.
Yeah.
And so
What it
that's
enables us, yeah. Oh, thank you for picking up on that. That's beautiful.
oh,
And it's quite it then, and this is the first time I've thought about the quiz in that way, but in a fashion, what it does is allow somebody from Pennsylvania or Ohio or, name any state to, in a way, have a conversation using the same language as the NASA team, while at the same time we're asking them about kind of what role they would play, and what I am extremely grateful for is the opportunity to kind of be the conduit, really for that. But, I think having that robust science, but also just the kind of thoughtful process of the words that we use behind a quiz is important for buy-in, because that and for kind of a resonant impact and resonant engagement, that it's not just about getting the result flashed up on the screen, but that it takes you on a journey. You're beginning a journey, whether that's a content journey, an engagement journey. It is, in the truest state, it's the first step, really, right, into an ongoing relationship. So I think as we're putting these quizzes together, thinking about what comes after in a way that is beneficial, not just to us as an organization for our insights, but beneficial to the humans that are taking that quiz, that we can build that relationship forward on to kind of pull them along that ladder of engagement. Okay, so we know that you like this. Now let's talk to you more about that. Bring them kind of deeper into engagement with our organizations. And that's really powerful. And it also feels good to know that you're benefiting everybody. There's also a number of people when it comes to taking quizzes that in order to buy in, they need to know the logic first. Why are you asking me to take this quiz?
hmm.
What are you going to do with the data? Um, and those are all very valid questions, and being able to explain a thoughtful rationale, um, that's oftentimes all they need to hear. Is like, oh, okay, all right, that's great. I'll buy in. I'll take your quiz. Um, but so I think thank you for picking up on that idea of the thinking behind the questions we ask.
Yeah, definitely. And there's clearly a lot of thinking behind it, even that little snippet that you just said of like what's the rationale,
Mm-hmm.
because you know there's that study, right, of like if you ask somebody to cut in line you don't give a reason, then they're not likely to let you cut. If you ask them to cut in line and you give any reason, doesn't matter what the reason is, then they're more likely to let you cut. And
Yeah.
that's, I mean, I think there should be an actual reason why, you're having people take, and you should give them a real answer of like, what are you going to do
Right,
with the information?
because it's an
Right.
investment, isn't it, of their time.
Hmm.
They are, and especially in this post-cookie world, they are sharing with you that highly valuable preference data. And, I think that's another reason that there should be a win for everybody, really, when we're asking folks to take these quizzes, um, that there's a benefit there for them as well.
Yeah. And then I wanted to go further on the topic of following up with the personalized,
Yes.
education, the personalized resources, because that was one thing that I noticed about that Artemis quiz is like there is so much about space. There's so much like NASA's been around for a long time. There's so much information. It's overwhelming if you're just gonna approach it from the surface level. Where do
Mhm.
you start? But you said the word buy-in, and I really like that word. You get buy-in from somebody through the quiz, and then you have the follow-up information after that. A lot of people ask me about that. So, how did you approach that? Like, how did you approach what information to give people, how much, how little, what's the cadence, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we're one of the areas of experience design that we have a specialty in is museum exhibit design. So taking complex content and making it kind of organized into different journeys and kind of narrative threads is something that we actually have a deep joy for doing. It's almost like this kind of librarian approach. But the other part of what we do a lot of is education, right? So we're thinking about what it means for people to retain content, retain information, and really kind of build upon it. Um, so we've found it to have a lot of value in certainly in the educational space and in the content space, and kind of then how we pass out that data. People have different levels of preference. Oftentimes we ask them, like, how frequently do you want to hear from us? with resources, do you want to hear from us? Resources. So giving people the optionality of what they're signing up for, like if they may just want to be entirely self-directed, and that is a-okay. They may want access to a Slack. They may want just a kind of steady drip and a knowledge that there is this community out there that you can access in different ways. So just giving people options, I think, on how they choose to continue that engagement is helpful, because more often than not, you'll find people sign up for what they want, rather than unsubscribe because they're being given something that doesn't align with their needs. So there's that. And then in terms of the messaging, it was really interesting. We found earlier this year we were noticing a sudden kind of spike in the Comic-Con quiz results coming through on Interact, and we're like, what's going on here then? And what we came to find out actually was that Virginia Air and Space Center and the state of Virginia had been using that quiz for their K-12 education. They actually came to us and said, okay, so we have been using your quiz for our K-12 education, and there are many ways in which this is great, but also it's not quite aligned, because it wasn't. They were ultimately the Boots results. They were aligning with different potential careers at NASA or in the space industry. So we helped them adjust it and take it and kind of tailor it to that application. But I think what that was number one, it was joyful to see that like it had that impact. But it just shows the appetite for people wanting to continue to engage and develop and apply those insights at that community level.
Yeah. And it also, in this case, and I think in a lot of cases where it's educational, it serves a really important role of making something fun and exciting and
Yeah.
personal. It's like all of a sudden, this is for me. And, weaving back in the wording and the idioms that are actually used within the program. And
Mm,
then you connect that back to your personalized quiz results, and
yeah.
then you have resources for you. I think it's just a really powerful and an important educational thing to personalize content, personalized learning. It's like so needed because the education is super important, and
Mm,
the more you can make it stick, the better. And
yeah.
I mean, what you're talking about is very memorable. Like,
Right.
you probably ask people in 6 months if they remember their moon boots.
I'll tell you.
Most of them can tell you, like
Yeah.
almost all of them.
Yeah. That's
Which, like,
amazing to think
how
about.
often, how often do you read something and then can recall something about it
Yeah.
6 months later? Like,
Which,
rarely, right?
and
So,
that's the goal. So yeah, and I think that's we're continuing to see the numbers trend upwards in terms of the desire for personalization.
mm,
And I think as cookies have gone away, it's a good thing in a way because cookies were always about demographics. They really kind of kept us tied to demographics. And at the end of the day, personalizing for demographics is inherently flawed because you can't paint an entire generation or a zip code with a set of preferences in terms of what matters to them. It just doesn't make sense. But if you're asking the questions in the right way that allow people to express their aspirations, their hopes, their preferences, their needs, their dreams, all of a sudden, as marketers, we can personalize for stuff that matters. Like you can segment your audience around what they really truly care about and what they're going to make decisions based upon. And I think that's also where the power, and of course that wasn't the focus for NASA, but for some of the organizations we serve, that is the goal, right? Is how do we, in this noisy world that we live in, break through the digital noise to, number one, engage people, and number two, provide solutions that are tailored to their needs, and communicate with them as humans. And it kind of brings us full circle to that idea that, like, the quiz is a conversation, and it's returning that information in ways that no other tool really can.
100%. And then I was just thinking about this morning, how there's two levels of personalization. You have what's common now, which is the demographics. In the cookie world, right? You gather all this data behind the scenes, and then, like, you tell people you're likely to want this, and it does work because it's obviously made a lot of companies a lot of money.
Yeah,
But then there's this second level where it's like, then you're asking people what they actually want and what
yeah,
they actually need, their interests, what they care about, what their life circumstances are. And they're telling you because they want a better experience.
yeah,
And just at a human level, I think it's better because it's like, okay, now we're on the same page here. Like,
yeah,
I'm not, it's almost like the first analogy is like, oh, I'm going around like talking to your friends to figure out what you want, and then, like, I'm gonna sell you this thing. Whereas, like, I could just talk to you and get to know you, and
yeah.
then, offer you something. And it's like, that just seems better to me.
I like that
Um,
too.
yeah, like, if we
Less,
could shift
less
towards that.
creepy, and I think that's there was this event that I spoke at a few years ago. It's like, what, the work of personalization doesn't have to be done under cover of darkness, like it's a kind of sneak attack. It can be done quite openly with an expression from the organization, and that's another thing that we find really powerful with buy-in is somebody from the organization is a leader saying, hey, we're asking you these questions because we want to know you better. We want to make sure that
Hmm.
we're doing right by you, that we're giving you everything that you need. It's important to us. Please take the quiz. It is amazing what that just human outreach can do in terms of setting a tone and
Yeah,
communicating.
100%.
Yeah.
And then it's voluntary, right? It's like, well,
Yeah.
I'm giving this to you, and in return, I expect a better experience.
Yeah.
And if you're not giving me that, I'm gonna take it back, and you can, right? Like
Right.
that's how it works now. It's like you
Right.
don't have to give it forever. Whereas the old world was like, I'm gonna take this from you. You're not even gonna
I'm gonna
know.
agree with your
You
data.
have no control over that. I think if you can have it be an opt-in world where like I'm telling you this because I
Mhm.
want a better experience from your company
Yeah.
because I actually do want to work with your company. I just
And
want
I
it to be
care about
helpful.
you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's all just above board and it's
Right.
like better for everybody. So, yeah.
100%.
That's great. That's great. Well, this is awesome conversation. I'm definitely going to listen back to it and uh, kind of do a write up on it because like there's so much here that I think is
Yeah, of
really
course.
important and helpful for my own learning. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank
Appreciate it.
you. Yeah, it was a lovely conversation. Thanks
Yeah,
for
and
having me.
if anybody's curious to learn more about Storycraft or more of your process, like more of
Yes.
how you all approach things, like where
Mhm.
can they go check that out?
There are a number of websites I'm going to rattle off for you.
Perfect.
Storycraftlab.com is our main site, and that has a lot of our kind of experience design work on there. If you want to go to a site called exprofiles.com, that'll get a lot of focus on the quizzes that we do. Lots of different types of quizzes. We call them the experience profiles, and that's one of our IP sets. And then finally, for those folks that are interested in learning more about our belonging work, there is the belongingplaybook.com site. And I did just launch another site. I've been doing this recently. So it's storycraft.education, not .edu, but it's storycraft.education. We're about to launch some classes on belonging centered experience design, and of course, quizzes and a method of dialogue are a part of that as well. So
That's really cool.
yeah.
I like that you're continuing to develop the portfolio and find different ways to put it out there.
Yeah,
That's
my
really
team
cool.
has. I'm going to have to stop soon, but
Yeah, yeah, eventually. Too
no
many
more
things.
sites for a minute, Naomi. Just calm down.
Nah, I mean, there is so many different ways to dissect this stuff that,
Yeah.
you know, I think that's awesome. Well, everybody check all those out. And thanks for being here, Naomi.
Oh, thanks for having me. Cheers, Josh.